In this section of the course, we're going to talk all about food photography. What is food photography? What does it look like? And what are the most important elements to know? Food photography is a genre of still life where pictures are taken of food. It's a specialization of commercial photography where food photos are usually used in advertisements, magazines, packaging, menus, or cookbooks. Much of the professional food photography that we see is fabricated or, at the very least, exaggerated. There are commonly full crews behind professional food photography, including photographers, food stylists, prop masters, set decorators. The list goes on and on. This is again another indication of just how complex food photography actually is as a genre. They are usually big productions with a lot of moving parts. Food photography can be a useful skill to know as an influencer, a food blogger, a passionate cook, or even a restaurant owner. If you're passionate about food or food is your livelihood, then being able to take good pictures of your food using the camera that is probably the most accessible to you is a great skill to know. Food photography is totally in the wheelhouse of the iPhone's camera. So much of what makes a good food photo lies in front of your camera. For that reason, the iPhone is a great camera to take food photos. There are certainly limitations when working with an iPhone, but with the skills that you learn in this course, you'll be able to maximize the potential of your iPhone's camera. The biggest benefit to the iPhone's camera is undoubtedly how accessible it is all the time. Anytime you're at a restaurant, you're likely to have your iPhone versus a full camera system. Even when you're at home, it can be a lot more convenient to pull out your phone than a dedicated camera. Perhaps the biggest drawback of the iPhone, especially when we're talking about food photography, is its deep depth of field. Depth of field is essentially how many elements are in focus in your frame. The iPhone has a deeper depth of field, so a lot of elements are going to be in focus. One of the common tropes of food photography is to shoot with a shallow depth of field where just the main subject or the main food is in focus. This can give a lot more attention to your subject. So without that, things like composition, light, and color come a lot more into play in order to focus that attention on your main subject. The iPhone has some great features that can be used for food photography. The camera has a crosshair feature which allows you to get perfect lay flat images. It has a burst mode which can allow you to capture motion, and many more features which allow you to fine-tune the look of your images. If you have access to Apple Pro RAW on your iPhone, then I would recommend using it for your food photography. This format is going to capture photos at a higher resolution, and it's going to capture more light and color information, which is really going to help when it comes to editing your food photos. As you'll come to find out, editing photos is a crucial step in the digital photography workflow. Any bit of extra information that you can capture is really useful. If your iPhone doesn't have access to Apple Pro RAW, that's okay. I'm working with an iPhone 12 mini and I also don't have access to that format. I shoot all my photos in JPEG format from my iPhone, and I'm able to get some great results by just making sure that my exposure and white balance are right in camera before I take the photo. Light and color is a little bit harder to manipulate on a JPEG photo without degrading the quality of the image. For those of you that don't have access to Apple Pro RAW, you can actually still capture raw images using your iPhone by using the Lightroom mobile app. Lightroom Mobile is an editing app developed by Adobe based on their desktop software. It's generally used as an editing software, but on the mobile version, they also have a camera which allows you to take photos in a DNG or RAW format. This format again captures more light and color information, so if the white balance was off when you were taking your photo, You can completely correct that in editing. You can also recover a lot more highlight and shadow detail from a raw image as opposed to a JPEG image. Having these capabilities when it comes to food photography is especially helpful because, as you're going to learn, color is a crucial element when it comes to the success of your food photos. The most important elements to food photography are, first and foremost, good looking food. I say good looking food because the food doesn't necessarily need to taste all that good. It just needs to look good. It should have a good amount of color. Ingredients should look fresh. The food should look fresh. It shouldn't look like it's been sitting out for too long. You don't want food that looks too saucy or bland, or the proportions are just off. The next important element is the plating, staging, and decorating portion. Plating is kind of your first step at composition in a way. Depending on your meal, there might be a different, better way to plate it. But generally, you want your meal to be plated in a tidy fashion. You don't want it to look too messy. You want it to look nice and clean, as if it's being presented to you at a restaurant. The staging and decorating portion is all of the elements that surround your meal in that general environment that make it into your photo but aren't actually a part of that main subject. Those things can be used to great effect to draw your eye into that main subject and create some sort of a narrative to your image. Light is a very important element to food photography. Understanding the right type of light to shoot your food in is going to make a huge difference to the way that your images look. Color is a very important element to food and should be explored in food photography. You want your food to look appetizing, and this is generally where getting accurate colors and nice saturated colors comes into play. You can also use color as a compositional tool and start to build color schemes and color stories into your images. Composition is also a very important element when it comes to food photography and generally talks about how the elements in your photo are arranged. Later on in this course, we're going to discuss some of the best compositional techniques to use with food photography and some of the more common photography angles that really help when it comes to taking pictures of food. The two most common scenarios when it comes to taking photos are either taking pictures of a home-cooked meal or taking pictures of food at a restaurant. Both of these scenarios have different considerations, different pros, and different cons. When you make a home-cooked meal or you take photos of food at home, you have a lot more freedom because you can create the food that you want to create. You have a lot more room to manipulate the light and set up a whole environment for that food to be photographed in. But it takes the most amount of work. You're generally not going to have your house set up to take food photos. You're going to have to get it ready and staged for the food that you're preparing. You're going to need to prepare that food and do this all in a timely manner. Generally, it's best to set up your shot and then cook the meal and then get the meal into the scene and take your photos. It can be a very tiring process, but again, you have the most amount of freedom that you really don't have when you take pictures in a restaurant. When you take pictures in a restaurant, you can leave all of the preparing and plating to the professionals. You're restricted to the environment of the restaurant and the available light that the restaurant has. It can be difficult to isolate your subject in a restaurant where you have busy backgrounds, and again, you don't have much control over where you're seated when you go to a restaurant typically. And going out to eat all the time can get very, very pricey. So again, both have pros and both have cons. They both allow you to experiment with food photography in different ways. In this course, for the majority of the elements, I'm going to discuss how to use that element in a home scenario and a restaurant scenario. Food photography is by no means an easy genre to tackle. There are a lot of moving parts and a lot of elements that need to be considered in order to get a great food photo. Through this course, you'll learn the skills that you need to know to take better pictures of your food, whether that's a home cooked meal, a meal at a restaurant, or the ingredients in your garden. In the next section of this course, we're going to talk about how to shoot better food photos using your iPhone.